Mindful meditation is the new medication. Can mindful meditation help cure depression and anxiety? Hi, my name's Hannah Thistle, and I'm going to be talking about mindful meditation. And my overarching research question that I'm posing is, will using mindfulness meditation techniques significantly help reduce the troublesome effects of depression and anxiety? This project is important because depression and anxiety rates are at an all-time high right now, and so is America's pill-popping epidemic. Pills taken for depression and anxiety have a variety of unwanted side effects, so why not take an alternative, natural approach of cultivating mindfulness in order to potentially lessen the effects of depression and anxiety? So what is mindful meditation? Meditation is a technique or exercise that has ancestral roots, ultimately used to increase the power of concentration as well as feelings of peace. And while a lot of people may feel as if this is a new fad or trend, meditation has been around for more than 5,500 years. And just the research that has been done recently is showing how meditation changes the structure and chemical makeup of the brain by physically decreasing the size of the amygdala, which is the brain's fear center, and then increasing the brain's natural amounts of dopamine, and then lowering the body's natural amount of stress hormone, which is cortisol. And meditation, especially mindful meditation, is tricky because it can really be hard to stop everything that you're doing, especially living in the age of distraction, with technology always just being a constant distraction for everyone. It can be hard to focus in on the present moment and not have our thoughts go to the past and be thoughts of regret or thoughts that we just tend to repeat, because that will lead us into a state of depression. And then also focus on not having our thoughts be worries about the future, because at the end of the day, no matter what, no matter how much we think about it, there's nothing that we can do to go back and change the past. What's done is done. And no matter how much we worry about the future, or how anxious we become, or how worried we can get, there's really nothing that we can do to control the future. All that we have control over is the present moment. And I feel like Lao Tzu said it best when he said, if you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. And that's what this mindful meditation is all about, is living in the present moment. So one of the main figures that brought a lot of popularity to mindfulness and mindful meditation is Dalai Lama. He said, "Man surprises me most about humanity because he sacrifices his health in order to make money. Then he sacrifices money to recuperate his health. And then he is so anxious about the future that he does not enjoy the present moment. The result being that he doesn't live in the present or the future. He lives as if he is never going to die, and then dies having never really lived." So here we see the Dalai Lama putting a very big emphasis on just living in the present moment, not being stuck in the past or worried about the future. One of the texts that I researched was called A Scientific Dialogue with the Dalai Lama on the Healing Power of Meditation, and this is by Jon Kabat-Zinn. And it talks about gaining control over our thoughts and emotions via mindful meditation. And specifically in this excerpt, he talks about the analogy of being shot by an arrow. And the Buddha said that when you experience physical pain, it's like being shot by an arrow. And there's really nothing that we can do to avoid that first physical pain. We're all going to get hurt. But on top of that physical pain, he says, if you resist it and resent it, it's like being shot by a second arrow. So what he's saying is, we all have control over that second arrow, how we're going to react and how our emotions are going to react to certain situations that are going to be thrown at us. But by practicing mindful meditation, we should have better control over that second arrow. And another text that I did some research on was called Calming Your Anxious Mind, How Mindfulness and Compassion Can Free You from Anxiety, Fear, and Panic by Jeffrey Brandley. Now, this is more of a self-help book, not as much of a research book. However, I thought that it gave a powerful and profound approach to overcoming anxiety, fear, and panic, and gave a lot of great techniques and just tips on how to use mindfulness to learn the role of one's thoughts and emotions and how they play into anxiety and depression. Very interesting text. Now I'm going to give a little background literature review. Depression and anxiety, as I talked about earlier, are at an all-time high right now, especially in America, and therefore these lead to just more prescriptions and drugs being prescribed than ever before, and this comes with its side effects. Practical Management of the Side Effects of Psychotropic Drugs by Richard Ballin really discusses all the unwanted side effects that come along with taking even the newest antidepressants and SSRIs. Mindfulness-based interventions and counseling is some really interesting research done by Amanda Brown as it discusses the different forms in which mindful meditation can be used as therapy, and she explains how even though it's gained popularity in America just in the 1990s, mindful meditation has been used as therapy since ancient times, and its full potential, she discusses, is still being researched. And an update on mindfulness meditation as a self-help treatment for anxiety and depression by Teresa Edenfield gave a holistic background on what it means to be mindful and practice meditation. So she discusses the relationship between stress and health, and mindful meditation relates to a therapeutically engaging relaxation response in the complementary and alternative medicine, which has increased significantly, especially in the mindfulness-based intervention or MBI category. Then we have William R. Merchant's Mindfulness Meditation Practices, Adjunctive Treatments for Psychiatric Disorders. And this is a great addition to the research proposal as it takes a much more scientific and anatomical approach to discovering the benefits in the body of mindful meditation. He even explains how mindful meditation increases the activation of the lateral prefrontal cortex, which ultimately enhances the emotional control and reduces symptoms of emotional overreacting. So the research done on the benefits of mindful meditation are really just beginning, as the long-term effects of meditation are still yet to be known. So here, from the Practical Management of the Side Effects of Psychotropic Drugs, we see in Table 5 here, the management of common side effects of newer antidepressants. So even with the newest antidepressants on the market, we still see a lot of people struggling with troublesome side effects like muscle tension, restlessness, insomnia, nausea, headaches, diarrhea, sexual dysfunction, not to mention the withdrawal symptoms, which are really hard to deal with antidepressants, as well as SSRIs in Table 1 and Table 4. We see the nausea, headache, insomnia, anxiety, drowsiness, and then with the less common side effects, we even see tremors, movement disorders, bleeding, etc. So the hope and why I even bring this text up is just to show how many side effects come along with taking these chemicals and putting all these chemicals in your body. So by practicing meditation where there really aren't side effects that are harmful, hopefully one day we can use meditation to get rid of the troublesome effects of depression and anxiety. Another book that I found to be, or text I found to be very interesting, was the research done by Amanda Brown on mindfulness. And she's talking about how it really started in the 1990s as dialectical behavioral therapy, and that turned into mindful-based cognitive therapy, which is proven to be great at preventing depressive relapse. And then you have what turned into mindfulness-based stress reduction, which has continuously been used to alleviate stress and chronic physical pain. And she really talks about the mindfulness meditations 8-week course as potentially creating lasting change. Here we see how she talks about how once mindfulness has been developed, the self can never be thought of in the same spatially based manner again. And mindfulness is really seen as the pivotal ingredient and the catalyst for profound change in the way that the self is experienced. So she really sees a lot more success with longer follow-up periods, as the effect of mindfulness is really a long-term one. And then we had an update on mindfulness meditation as a self-help treatment for anxiety and depression by Teresa Edenfield. And this was really interesting for me because she talked about the different types of cognitive therapy that has mindfulness-based stress reduction, and how these are all derived from ancient Buddhist and yoga philosophies. And I feel that this adds a lot to the proposed research because it discusses the relationship between stress and health, and how studies in the basic studies of mindfulness could create improvements in health, quality of life, ability to engage in meaningful relationships with others, and not only be short-term but also long-term. This text is great because it gave a lot of great definitions and a great background on where mindfulness and meditation really stemmed from and how we see it used in today's society. And then finally, one of the research texts that I found to be very important was mindfulness meditation practices, adjunctive treatments for psychiatric disorders. And this is by William R. Marchand. And what I really liked is how it gave a more scientific and anatomical approach to how mindfulness meditation is going to impact the human body. And here's just an excerpt if you want to just really get into the details of it all. But what I found is that what was most interesting is that mindfulness decreases the cortical midline structure activation, which is involved in emotional processing, and mindful meditation actually increases the activation of the lateral prefrontal cortex, which enhances emotional control and reduces symptoms of emotional overreacting. On to the research question at hand. Does practicing mindful meditation decrease one's depression and or anxiety symptoms? Well, my proposed hypothesis is that using mindfulness meditation techniques helps reduce the troublesome effects of depression and anxiety. I will be using quantitative research data as my main method of collecting data. Specifically, I will be using surveys, and this method is suitable for my proposed research because it will be the most efficient, effective, and cheap way of collecting data. So the description of the study population and my sampling strategy. So my study population will be college students, primarily the ages of 17 to 27, who are suffering from depression and anxiety. The study population will include people who were told that they have anxiety and or depression by a medical professional, and people who have not been told this by a medical professional but still struggle with the symptoms of depression and anxiety. My sampling strategy is going to be convenient sampling, and it is important to note that this will have a limitation. The limitation to this strategy would be that the results may not accurately reflect the results of the general population because the participants volunteered to be a part of this study. Therefore, it was not randomized and the results could be slightly biased. My sample size will be 45 college students altogether, broken up into 4 groups of 15 students. Experimental group 1 will consist of 15 college students with a formal diagnosis of depression and or anxiety by a medical professional. And they will have access to the mindful meditation course, which is going to be 8 weeks, and I'm going to explain that a little bit later, what it's going to consist of. Experimental Group 2 will consist of 15 college students with no formal diagnosis of depression and or anxiety by a medical professional, and they will be going through the mindful meditation course. Control Group 3 will consist of 15 college students with a formal diagnosis of depression and or anxiety by a medical professional, and they will not go through the mindful meditation course. And Control Group 4 will consist of 15 college students with a formal diagnosis of depression and or anxiety by a medical professional, and they will not be going through the mindful meditation course. So the groups will be determined first by having the entire population of participants being divided into 2 groups of 30, then they'll be stratified by gender. Then the men and women will be randomly assigned to one of the 4 groups that I just mentioned using a randomized group generator. So this is how I plan to measure the key concepts. I will survey my entire population about their levels and their symptoms of depression and or anxiety before their potential enrollment in the mindful meditation course. 8 weeks later, I will have my entire population take the survey again, with the lowest score of depression, stress, and anxiety being 0, and the highest score possible, meaning that you're the most stressed and anxious, being 42. And I will look to see if any depression or anxiety symptoms have subsided within the experimental group after being enrolled in the course. I will expect to see the control group's results stay relatively similar, as they will not be going through the course. And these surveys will be computer generated, and all the results will be kept private. So here we have an example of a text that would be included at the beginning of each survey, and it would just give the population a little bit of a background on explaining mindfulness and meditation to them. Then I will include something like this example here to determine the participants' interest and motivation for using this mindfulness-based intervention. So, let me give you a few details about the survey. All members of the population will be required to complete a very short depression, anxiety, stress test survey, both before and after completing the mindfulness training if they're in the experimental groups. The results will be strictly sent to the researcher then to analyze. And here I've included a link to this depression, anxiety, and stress test. And then just for an example, the survey results would look something like this. And obviously everyone is going to be different. In this case, this person was severe in depression, extremely severe in anxiety. And then it will go on to explain your results in more detail. This is just an example of what someone got on that. And then just for a deeper explanation of the 8-week mindfulness course, you see each week, this is just an example of what it could be like. Week 1 could focus on the mental states of the people. We'll do body scans, mindfulness practice. Week 2 could be doing a sitting meditation. Week 3 we have breathing practices. You can see in week 6 it's using breathing and mindfulness to combat stressful situations. Again, this is just an example of an 8-week course. And then these are just a few examples of practices that would be done. So we have walking and stretching meditation, which would give you a lot of first-hand experience with mindfulness, learning to use mindfulness on an ongoing basis, making it an ongoing practice, and then just learning how to use mindful meditation when experiences or unpleasant emotions or stress arise. The aim would be to shift from the mental state of naturally wanting to overreact and just learn how to control our emotions and our breath to get us into a state where we feel controlled and at peace. Now, a brief description of the analytic plan is once all the data from the 2 surveys has been collected, the information would be categorized by the researcher. And I, being the researcher, would look for graph correlations between decreased depression and or anxiety symptoms and increased levels of being enrolled in the mindful meditation course for an increased amount of time within the 30 depressed or anxious college students enrolled in the course. And then I would also make a graph predicting what will be seen for the control groups that struggled with depression but did not partake in the course. And I predict that their survey results would stay about the same. And just to give you a visual on that, here is the expected analytical data graph of the 2 experimental groups. So these would be the participants that received mindful meditation in the 8-week course. And as you can see, the longer that they spend in the meditation course, as the weeks go on, we would see that their score would move from a really high score in their beginning from their first survey, with the high score being a 42. I would predict that the scores would eventually move lower as they spent more time in the meditation course. I would predict that their depression and anxiety levels got lower. Now here we would see, just say that the average for my control group was around 23 or 24. I would predict that if they didn't go through, they spent 0 weeks in this mindful meditation course, I would predict that their results would stay relatively the same. So, an explanation of any ethical considerations. This proposed research would require an IRB approval because there are human subjects involved, and there is a plan to perform the treatment on some individuals but not others. All information, however, will remain private. There will be a master list which will contain all the information about which participant is which, as well as which groups they belonged in, and there will be a password protected hard drive. If the research showed that the 8-week mindful meditation course did help lessen the effects of depression and anxiety among the experimental groups, the course would then be offered, of course, to the people who are in the control groups as well. And here's my works cited reference slide. Thank you so much for listening in on this presentation today.